The regime of the Assad family in Syria was at the center of Middle East politics for over 50 years, and now it's gone. I'm Hanan Lischinsky, and in this All Israel News update we'll try to understand the events that happened just over our northeastern border in Syria over the last couple of days. And I will try to give you an understanding not just of what happened, because much has written about this, but what could happen now in the future and what to look out for, what the important developments are that will determine the future of Syria, Israel, and the whole region for the next couple of decades, potentially. So just to recapitulate, 2 weeks ago the Assad regime seemed stable, and many were writing about the fact that the Assad regime had basically won the Syrian civil war that broke out in 2010-11, and the Assad regime seemed stable in the areas that it controlled, but it didn't control all the areas. For example, in the northwestern corner of Syria, the city of Idlib and the surroundings were controlled by a terror group that was once part of Al-Qaeda, once part of the Islamic State, and is now called Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. This is the group that's called HTS in English and is led by Abu Muhammad al-Julani. And this group, 2 weeks ago maybe, all of a sudden broke out of this enclave that they had secured for the last couple of years, that they had ruled for the last couple of years, and in a lightning strike took the city of Aleppo, the largest city in Syria and the most important economic center in Syria and in the whole region, really. This strike came as a complete surprise, and apparently the Syrian armed forces were most surprised of all, because they, over the next couple of weeks, just continued to crumble away. The Syrian armed forces basically collapsed before the onslaught of this group that was much smaller in number, was probably less well equipped, but they did use some interesting new tactics. For example, the very sophisticated use of cheaply made, locally produced drones. Again, this is a red line that we've been seeing throughout the October 7 invasion, the Gaza war, the Ukraine war in the past. So drones have really played an important part here. So after the fall of Aleppo, as I said, the army really started to crumble. There was some fighting in the beginning, but basically what happened is that a large rebel alliance led by HTS just continued advancing south, taking city after city, Hama, Homs, and even before they reached Damascus, in parallel, another kind of rebel alliance really rose up and just snatched the whole of southern Syria. I think they began on Friday. Basically by Saturday, the whole of southern Syria up to the capital of Damascus was in rebel hands, was in open rebellion against the government, against the regime of Bashar al-Assad. So yesterday morning we basically woke up with the news that Assad had fled. Again, there was almost no fighting around the Syrian capital. Rebel groups just poured in from the south shortly after. HTS leader Abu Muhammad al-Julani was photographed. We saw videos of him entering the central mosque in Damascus, and this really symbolized the end of the Assad regime after almost 60 years, 50-something years that they ruled in Syria and really dominated, projected power, economic, social, cultural, military power across the Middle East. And this really is a major turning point for this region. So this is what happened over the last almost 2 weeks in Syria. But now I want to focus on, as I mentioned earlier, what the most important developments will be to determine the situation going forward. And what I think is the most important question, open question yet, is who will control Syria and if Syria will even continue to be a unified state. As I mentioned earlier, HTS really led this rebel advance from the north, but its forces didn't even reach Damascus. Probably they will reach Damascus today if they continue to advance. But we don't really know if HTS will be able to control all of the territory that it has now freed. So as I mentioned, the HTS was really it's an alliance of several groups under the command of this al-Julani, but they were based in the north, and all of the areas that they now freed have large populations, of course, that they don't control. They don't have any way of controlling them. and it didn't even reach the capital, so they don't have any control over the capital yet. On the other hand, this southern joint command, they created some kind of joint control room, command room. These southern rebels, we don't really know who they are at the moment. There hasn't really been much written about them at all. They appear to control southern Syria, so the part that is most relevant to Israel. But again, we don't really know what will happen to the Syrian state, if it will break apart into several areas that will be controlled. Maybe, for example, the Alawite coast, the area of the cities of Latakia and Tartus. We have no idea what will happen there, who controls them at the moment. They appear to have joined the rebellion despite being Alawite, so the Assad regime was based on Alawite minority populations in Syria. So this is what really will determine the course of Syria, who takes control there, what kind of government it will be, and of course the question that really continues to be maybe the most reported aspect of this all is HTS still a kind of Al-Qaeda style group? Are they still Salafi Islamists as they have always been? Or is this kind of changed course, this kind of changed approach that their leader Al-Jilani has been presenting, is this a true change of heart and maybe they have moderated somewhat? I think it's good to hope. I think we should hope for the best but prepare for the worst, and this is what Israel is doing, of course. Possibly the most important foreign player in all of this is Turkey. Now, Turkey, according to various reports, has either directly supported and funded or at least tacitly supported HTS's advance. But Turkey also has a whole other group of rebels, of some, they have been called mercenaries by some, that really act at Turkey's behalf and really follow its instructions. And these forces have not even really taken part in the advance on Damascus. Instead, they've been fighting the Kurds in northeastern Syria. So Turkey traditionally has always fought any kind of organized Kurdish presence on its borders. It views the Kurds as a security threat both inside Turkey and outside Turkey. And this is one of the main points, maybe what Turkey decides to do here, if it decides to back a kind of HTS-led government for Syria, if it continues to fight the Kurds in northeastern Syria, and it really remains to be seen what their plans are. But I just want to note here, again, Turkey has been occupying large parts of Syria for the past years. It has continued to fight the Kurdish rebel groups, the Kurdish kind of interim government that has been set up in Rojava, as they call it, northeastern Syria. And this has really flown under the radar. I mean, the bulk of the reporting obviously was on the rebel advance on Damascus, but meanwhile, Turkey is bombarding and striking the Kurdish areas in the northeast, and really nobody seems to care. Compare this to the outsized attention every time Israel strikes somewhere, and you'll maybe understand why, especially in Israel, many people are really upset and are pointing to the continuing behavior of Turkey, in northeastern Syria, and asking why the international community really doesn't seem to care. Another major player in Syria, of course, is Hezbollah, and this is where we get into the whole Iranian-backed axis. And the most important part of this axis is Hezbollah. So the terror group had forces stationed in Syria at the eve of this rebel advance. There were reports that it sent additional troops. I saw a report saying that around 2,000 troops had joined the Syrian army in Homs, where it intended to have some kind of, to establish some kind of defensive line, but that line crumbled, so apparently the troops immediately retreated to Lebanon. Now it will remain to be seen what Hezbollah decides to do. Will they keep troops around their borders to try to maybe prevent any kind of rebel advance into Lebanon, or will they continue to try to smuggle weapons through Syria into Lebanon? We really don't know what they will decide to do. It's also important to note that apart from troops, Hezbollah had established large infrastructures in Syria, because they really had taken active part in the civil war. They established bases, posts, weapon depots, and it can be estimated that Israel at the moment is striking all kinds of strategic advanced weapons throughout Syria, and it can be estimated that the Hezbollah infrastructure in Syria is a part of what's being attacked. Again, we will have to wait and see to discover more details about what Israel has been doing these past 2 nights, really, in striking across Syria and destroying all kinds of advanced weapons there. And this brings us, of course, to Hezbollah's big patron, the Iranian regime. Now, like Hezbollah, the Iranian regime took an active part in the civil war. The Iranian regime had its IRGC, so the Revolutionary Guards, high-ranking generals that were stationed in Syria. Its elite Quds force was very active in Syria. The IRGC brought in mercenaries or Shia militias from Pakistan, from Afghanistan. They really recruited across the Shia world to throw forces into Syria, and this is what almost won the Assad regime the Syrian war. A big question is why they really didn't take part in the fighting now, why they really didn't do anything really to try to stop the rebel advance despite having forces in Syria that they could have used. But now it seems that almost all of these forces fled. There were reports that the Iranian regime was in direct contact with HTS, which is amazing in itself, because these are really 2 ideological movements that are very, very strongly opposed. They see each other as unbelievers. They've been slaughtering each other where they could over the past years in Syria. So the fact that the Iranian regime reached out to HTS to ask for a safe withdrawal of its forces, and apparently even asked the HTS to safeguard the Syrian shrines that are in Damascus. So, for example, maybe the stronghold of the Iranian forces in Syria was a suburb just south of Damascus called Sayyida Zainab. There's a shrine there to the Zainab that was mentioned, who was a Shia figure in Shia history. And this shrine, even the fact that they withdrew from there is really incredible, because all of these militias that I mentioned that were recruited across the Shia world, they were brought to Syria with the motivation, with the Iranian regime claiming that this shrine was in danger, and this was the reasoning they gave why they had to bring in all of these militias. And now they're contacting their big ideological enemy, these Al-Qaeda, ISIS-style Sunni Islamists, in order to negotiate a withdrawal. So that's really incredible. This, in my eyes, leaves 2 very important questions. So one, why didn't they react at all? And do they have a move left to play? I think they don't have a move left to play, apparently, in Syria. They're withdrawing all of their forces. They're negotiating withdrawals with their arch enemies. It seems as if the Iranian presence in Syria is finished at the moment, which is great news for Israel, of course. The second part is the implications of why they couldn't act at all. Now, I read yesterday a very interesting thread on X by a researcher from the United Against Nuclear Iran think tank, and he reported he spoke to members of the IRGC who told of very strong internal disagreements in the IRGC and in the Iranian leadership. So there's a large growing discontent within the younger cadres of the IRGC, very radical, very ideologically committed IRGC members who are very angry with the Iranian leadership for just letting Syria slip out of their hands after almost a decade of fighting and blood. So this is really going to be critical to see whether this Syria disaster has direct implications for the stability of the Iranian regime at home, and whether maybe the Iranian people take a cue from the Syrian people and start rising up against their regime as well. This leaves us with the last major player in the Syrian arena, which is Israel. Now, Israel over the past couple of days has massively increased its troop numbers in the Golan Heights. This in itself is a critical development to take note of, because there are still large numbers of troops in Gaza, large numbers of troops in Judea and Samaria to try to keep the area calm. Soldiers continue to hold the ceasefire lines in Lebanon, and now more troops were deployed to the Golan Heights. IDF Chief of Staff Herzi Halevi even talked about a fourth frontier, a fourth border that IDF troops were now engaged in combat. While this at the moment seems not to be true. Defense Minister Israel Katz has ordered the IDF to take over a buffer zone across the Golan Heights frontier. So yesterday during the night, Israeli forces advanced past the Israeli border and took over the buffer zone that had been controlled by by UN peacekeeping forces. And the IDF appears at the moment, we don't really know, but appears to have advanced to the lines that were drawn up in the ceasefire agreement in 1974 between Syria and Israel, and appears to have taken over this demilitarized zone, arguing that the other side in this agreement really doesn't exist anymore, and armed rebel groups are roaming about in the Syrian countryside, so Israel is taking precautions. Yesterday morning, the IDF also announced that the Israeli Air Force special unit, a commando unit named Shaldag, had taken over the Syrian part of the Hermon mountain. Now, the Hermon mountain range is divided between Israel, Lebanon, and Syria, but the Syrian part was the highest part and is really a strategic place overlooking large parts of southern Syria. You can see the capital Damascus from there. The other side oversees large parts of southern Lebanon. So the whole area where the IDF had advanced, was battling Hezbollah, can be seen from up there. And of course, the Syrian part also looks deep into Israel. So this was a strategic location, and especially older Israelis really had an emotional time seeing those pictures. There were pictures of an Israeli flag being flown on the Syrian part of the Hermon. So remember, before this ceasefire agreement that I mentioned earlier, the Yom Kippur War and in earlier wars, Israel tried to capture the Hermon. Syrian soldiers had attacked from the Hermon. Israeli soldiers fell in the battles there, so it was really emotional for many Israelis to see these pictures. And talking to some people here, it really seems that I think many Israelis, also many ministers, said that Israel maybe shouldn't give back, shouldn't be too quick at least to give back this highly strategic place, the peak of the Hermon Mountains. And it remains to be seen, again, an open question, a question what will happen in the future. It's dependent on what happens in Syria, of course, but for now the Israeli army seems to be in control of the Hermon and all of the buffer zone, this demilitarized zone along the Golan Heights. And we will have to see what happens in Syria and whether Israel will stay in these areas or maybe give them back once a new government is established in Syria. Also watch out for the international reactions to Israel taking these security precautions and securing what really is a small 3-4 kilometers strip of land across the Golan Heights. The UN, I think, is sure to condemn at some point the Israeli seizure of this buffer zone. But remember, as I mentioned in the beginning, Turkey has been occupying huge swaths of land across its border with Syria for 5-6 years now. And I didn't hear a lot of condemnation of this. So keep an eye out. We will also inform you on allisrael.com if and when the UN will condemn Israel for seizing 3 to 4 kilometers strip of land, much of it, by the way, uninhabited. So the Syrian Hermon is uninhabited, was taken without a fight because the Syrian army abandoned it. But as I mentioned, it really will come down to what happens in Syria. There were in the Israeli media a lot of reports. Some reporters are even in direct contact with rebel representatives, and some of them said really nice things. They want peace with Israel. They're looking forward to opening an Israeli embassy in Damascus. All of this would be great. So I really want to, I know that there's been a lot of coverage in the international media, in the US and Europe, of the Islamist rebels. Many people are saying we shouldn't trust them. I think all of that is true, but at the same time, it is really a hopeful period right now in Israel, despite the hostages still not being back. It seems that Israel sees positive developments across all of its frontiers. Hamas appears to be ready for a ceasefire, maybe a hostage deal. Hezbollah is on its knees. Its patron, Iran, is crumbling. The Iranian axis is collapsing. The Assad regime has fallen. So it's a really hopeful time here in Israel. And I think former Defense Minister Golan summed it up pretty well. Despite all the inherent risks, for example, Islamists taking over Syria, Syria becoming a kind of jihadi-style state, the fall of this murderous Assad regime, a regime that was very hostile to Israel, benefits Israel for now. Here at All Israel News, we will continue to keep an eye on all of these developments, on all of these open questions that will remain regarding Syria, Israel, and the broader Middle East. Follow us on allisrael.com, here on our YouTube channel and all the other social media channels to stay informed.